Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. We have a really interesting session prepared for you. Today we have a Q&A with Looker customer Comcast, and it's all about their experience creating a data-driven culture with a modern data stack. My name is Pedro Arellano, and I'm the head of product marketing for Looker. And I have the pleasure of being joined by Jim Forsythe. Jim is the head of the product analytics and behavior science teams for the technology, product, and experience organization at Comcast. And in his role, he's essentially responsible for transforming bits of data into consumable and productive insights. Now, this involves building data pipelines, researching new ideas, developing key metrics, and overall supporting data-driven decision-making. Now, prior to Comcast, Jim led data science teams for a Fortune 500 management consulting firm, where he specialized in product analytics, user behavior research, and retention modeling for new product initiatives. Welcome, Jim, and thank you very much for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Pedro. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, Jim, I understand that before diving into data science, you were a professional lacrosse player.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, I'm not really a big lacrosse guy. I'm more of a soccer guy, but I got to ask you, at what point did you regret your decision of going into data science?
I don't think I regretted my decision going to data science. I do most certainly regret choosing directly out of college to try to be a professional athlete and also be a consultant at the same time. I literally had zero time for anything other than work and sports. So it was quite interesting, but I got really good at time management.
Let's talk now about Comcast. You've got a pretty important job there. Tell us about some of the challenges from a business perspective that you're facing in this industry right now.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting time. There are really two big things for us, I guess frontmost and center, especially for me within the product and technology group. One in being that the internet is more important than ever. Even as we're forced to be at home within a world of a pandemic, we depend on the internet more than ever to do something as simple as this conference. Secondly, the landscape of media and entertainment is changing. And in a world where people want direct to consumer, people want to have streaming entertainment, we're able to provide that entertainment through our traditional X1 platform, through a new platform that we launched later this year or later last year, which is Flex, and an app that we launched as direct to consumer with our NBC team with Peacock. So we're really entering a lot of new places, but we're super excited and we're doing a great job.
Yeah, I actually signed up for the Peacock app just this weekend to watch the U.S. Open. It's very exciting.
Yeah, it's a great time, and it's great for Comcast to be able to leverage all of the assets it has to provide a better customer experience overall.
So, of course, these types of apps and streaming services are particularly popular right now that everybody's spending so much time at home. So tell me a little bit about some of those challenges you were mentioning. How were they altered, in any way, if they were, with the COVID-19 pandemic this year?
Yeah, so like many companies in March, April timeframe, we moved to a work from home if you can environment. And that overall, in terms of our organization, didn't really change too many things in terms of we still work together, although not in person, but virtually. And we already had a good virtual conference app in play where we could easily call each other, talk to each other, see each other on video. So that was all good. But like ourselves and everybody else, we depended on our internet service more than ever. So we go from developing and creating an internet service for largely people to connect all their devices, consume entertainment, etc., to doing that plus all of their business in terms of working from home. And also, not to mention, people's kids are at home and now using this for entertainment and also their education. So it's more important than ever. I'm glad to say that it's been a great success story for us as soon as we went or had even thought about this was coming. The team did a lot of work to make sure that we could handle the capacity, made sure that speeds were what people would expect. And it's been great. It forced a lot of people to think about things a little differently, forced a lot of teams to collaborate. But it was a great success story for us overall.
That's really interesting, Jim, what you just mentioned. We see it all across our customer base this year. Different types of companies and different types of industries really reacted in different ways to what's happening. You saw some companies that were really focused on optimizing costs, while others, like in your situation, really trying to figure out is how do we react to this increase in demand? So, tell me a little bit about data strategy at Comcast and how that helped you react to this disruption you saw because of the pandemic.
Yeah, there were some investments that we made before the pandemic and some like data and analytics strategy that we've really been working on, empowering into, call it our culture. Those two things, firstly, were analytics and self-service. So we pride ourselves in empowering our team members within our organization to get the answers to the questions that they have and self-service the insights that they want to generate. And we do that via a couple different means, via either SQL endpoints or products like Looker, where people can come in, they can see all of the dashboards that they currently have, dive into the explorers and run analysis themselves with a really low technical bar to get the answers that they need. And those people who have that question usually are the best ones to generate the answer. So when we can have them self-service and get the insights, when we have conversations with them later, they're so much more informed and they have dashboards and explorers that they can show us of all the insights they've generated. And that just creates more complex questions that our data science and our analytics teams can help them solve. Secondly, we've been really focused on experimentation and experimenting at scale, which really helps our teams be able to develop features and test them within a testing environment so they can be testing their ideas against real customers. What this does is it allows them to understand the value of the thing they created against the metrics that are important to that feature. What this really does is just help empower people to drive new features, to drive new change, to test ideas, and understand the actual value of what that feature or service brings, which is super powerful.
Jim, hearing you talk about self-service and experimentation makes me think about the different use cases that we see across our customer base. And one thing that's really fascinating to me personally is how we're seeing our customers find very innovative ways of using data, some of which may not resemble BI at all, but the idea is let's put data to work in a way that makes sense for that particular person based on their role, their skill set, their data needs. So, in this case, the term self-service, it's used so much in this industry. What does it mean for you and what does it mean for Comcast?
Yeah, so self-service for us is quite interesting. I work in what we call product and technology group. So our group does tend to be more technical than your standard. So when we first started creating the strategy of what we really wanted, let's say like our BI platform, our data strategy to be, we knew that we had to empower our individuals and empower them to be able to ask the questions they had and get data and insights back. If we didn't do that, we knew that we wouldn't be successful. So we had to figure out what was the level of technical competence within our organization to be able to ask the question or write the query in a sense. So we started with a SQL basically interface where people could go and just write queries and get results. That works, but there was only a select few of people who really knew how to write SQL and write it well, which is a whole different thing of like writing SQL, isn't too bad. It's pretty logical, but writing it well and making sure that when you do various joins, they all work well. So writing it well was a bit of a challenge, and it put a lot of weight on our infrastructure to be able to support that. So we needed a couple different ways that we were going to give that self-service option. So Looker was a great solution for us, where it allowed our data analysts, our data scientists, engineers, and even some product people who are pretty technical to go in and design LookML, think about the types of questions that were going to need to be answered, the types of dashboards that we needed to be created. They can go and develop all of that, and then that's used many, many times. People can take that same, let's say, dashboard you created, clone it, make some changes specific to them. The best example of this is if you have, let's say, a mobile service and you create a dashboard for it, the iOS, Android, and even then web engineers or engineering groups can take that same dashboard, clone it down, integrate their filter, and now have their very specific dashboard that they need ready to go for them. I think that's a great example, but it's just enabling people to answer the questions they have and then give them the tools to do that quickly is just key. And then in a group like ours, where we're in a tech group, the time from question to then answer or insight is critical because things move so fast.
Yeah, I mean, it almost sounds like the way that you're delivering insights in a really agile way. It almost sounds more like you sort of productized BI as opposed to doing things in the traditional way. Do you see it that way? Do you think of traditional BI and the way that you're doing it in a different way?
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely think about our products and services that we deliver to, let's say, our internal stakeholders as products, just as if, any of our development engineering teams create products and services delivered to our larger customer base. We try to think about things the same way, try to get feedback from all of those people to make sure what we're giving them resonates, works well. We're evolving it so that it has that product market fit, if you will. But just in terms of like how we think about BI overall, we do think about it a little bit differently, just in terms of how we set up our architecture, how we set up our infrastructure. We set up for a prioritization of how do we get answers and questions in near real time. So we try to make sure that the data flows are really fast and the data is available very quickly. That kind of starts to break down traditional models where, large scale ETL processes are in place. Those things just don't tend to work quite as well because they're not as nimble and they have a lot of moving parts. So we try to flatten that out into more of just a pipeline infrastructure where you have your raw data and you basically have software you deploy against it, which, for example, maybe Spark code, maybe just kind of like some SQL work where you're just kind of massaging the data around a little bit. But you think of that as essentially software to then build a data model that can answer many, many questions. That's the way we kind of like to think about that structure. We can then push that data into various services like our experimentation platform, our analytics platform, Looker, and also our AI teams can use this same data on a foundation of a single data source to then answer all of these questions various ways. To think about that from a traditional BI perspective, it just doesn't kind of line up because you're answering a lot of questions with very pointed solutions and aggregate data. So that's kind of the shift or the spin that we take on it.
Yeah, for sure. You've mentioned real-time data. You've mentioned not depending on the traditional ETL models, for example, but still being able to operate on top of a shared data model. That obviously makes me think of some of the main value that the Looker platform offers. When you were evaluating Looker, is that what you noticed that made you decide Looker was the right tool to support what you were trying to do? Or can you talk a little bit about how Looker fits in within your data strategy?
Yeah, I think Looker really helps us go from, let's say, data and like data model to insights pretty quickly. Something that's super valuable about Looker is the ability to encode with LookML the values that you want to drive, and like I said, a data scientist, an engineer, data analyst, etc., all these kind of like data people, I'll call them, can do many or do once to then many like value chain operations of create LookML, structure that in a way that's useful to many teams. And now those many teams can go and look at that data and solve all of their problems, build their own dashboards. But that data engineer, analyst, etc., those data people can solve that problem once and then enable all these other people to do a lot of work. So that was a big valuable component to our decision in choosing Looker. It also had good fit with our customers, our internal customers. The bar to interact with Looker explorers, to see dashboards, was very natural for people, and it took off very quickly.
So, Jim, you were talking about all these different user roles at Comcast, and when you think about the different people that are involved in the BI process, whether they are more on the delivery side or on the consumption side, and when you think about how BI is happening today, how do you compare that against before, when Looker was brought in?
Yeah, I would say as we kind of like mature and let's say our data-driven strategy and life cycle, I would say we're using data to make decisions more than ever, which is critical. So more people have the ability to use data, insights, facts to make decisions, which is what we really want to push. We really want to try to create these scientific principles and instill them in our teams to be thinking about how do I gather the right information to make a decision based on facts and moving away from opinions. So I think that's the biggest shift, is really just empowering people to make those decisions based on, insights, analytics, facts, and then getting away from opinion-based decision making.
Now, in general, and now just not about Comcast, but just in general, think about your experience in data science and analytics. Is that kind of the trend that you're seeing, that there's technology is sort of evolving to the point where more and more people can make decisions like this, or do you think that there's kind of like a point where certain people are just not going to behave like analysts, and you just can't force them into that role?
Yeah, I'd say just my observations overall of the industry is the bar to be able to use data to make decisions, to develop services, whether that be, like services that depend on data to update and have like a personalized experience, or, like AI experiences, et cetera, is it's getting easier, which is quite interesting. So I think a lot of this has been powered by agile practices, the cloud, which you guys are now a part of with Google Cloud as well as Amazon. I think they're really reducing the bar technically to be able to develop and deploy these services at really, really big scale. And there are these services on top that make things a lot easier, where you don't need to be a PhD necessarily to develop an AI or ML service, which is quite interesting. So I just think in general, the industry is really moving towards empowerment, if that's probably a good word, around using data as an input or analytics or insight to drive something, which is great.
Jim, that's a really interesting point about empowerment. I want to come back to that before we wrap up, but I do want to take a moment to ask you about things that you've learned, because this is a Looker user conference, and the audience is really interested in learning from their peers and just hearing about what recommendations you can give them. So any best practices or tips and tricks or lessons learned that you can share with the audience based on your own experience with data or with Looker specifically?
Yeah, I would say a best practice to adopt within whomever your company is, whatever your team is, your organization is, to figure out how to democratize analytics and insight into that organization and give everyone that equal playing field of having data, insight, to make the decisions that they need to and drive their business, their engineering, their et cetera. I think that's a really powerful thing to give to somebody. And I would encourage everyone to make sure that they think about not only how maybe a tool like Looker or some other tool can help them as maybe an analyst, a scientist, an engineer, but also just thinking about, their team members, their organization, and how it could really help them answer the questions that they have and get to data-informed decision-making cultures.
So thanks, Jim, for sharing those insights. I'm sure the audience really appreciates it. And I do want to come full circle. The topic for this conversation is all about creating a data-driven culture. When you think about what it means to create a data-driven culture and how you define success, like when do you think you've actually achieved that transformation into a data-driven culture? Obviously, you mentioned empowerment earlier. Empowering end users is a part of that, but what else are you looking for when you think about this?
Yeah, it's quite interesting of being a data-oriented team and a data-focused team. It's actually quite challenging to measure ourselves. You wish you could measure decision made via data or insight, and that's not actually something you can really do. So we do try to keep ourselves and hold ourselves to the same standard we would a product team of measuring ourselves against KPIs and metrics. So we do try to measure ourselves against the number of people running queries, the types of people accessing dashboards, the types of people running experiments. And experiments starts to get a little bit easier where we can measure things like percent of roadmap A/B tested, percent of features deployed with an A/B test. So that does start to help us get to like a measurement value that we can say, percent of things. But really when we start to think about like, when are we getting really good at this is when people start coming with data to meetings where they're making decisions, and when questions are asked, people are resulting back to things of the analysis that I ran, the information I have, this model we created, instead of I think, I thought, my opinion is. That's when you really start to think about, hey, we're really starting to get good at this. The culture is really starting to shift towards using data to make decisions instead of opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's exciting to think about that. I mean, I think it's the goal of every analytics practitioner is to get people to really operate that way and think that way and make decisions based on data more so than gut feel. It's exciting. And what other things excite you, Jim, just to wrap up, when you think about where the industry is headed, when you think about the future of analytics and data, what are some of the things that you're excited about?
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot. I'll kind of go back to some of the things I said earlier is the technology that data teams are able to leverage are really advancing at a rapid pace. I personally think it's kind of the most rapid in industry where, a handful of years ago, the technology that we all use, in some cases doesn't even exist. To think like things like Spark, things like Amazon, tools like Looker, et cetera, like some of these things just weren't generally available. And to think about what the next 10 years start to look like, it starts to get really interesting. And I know a couple things for sure, like the bar for, let's say, like a data scientist, a data engineer, a data analyst, et cetera, their requirement on probably writing really complex code will be a lot lower. There'll probably be a whole lot more libraries, point and clicks, those types of services where they call them, I think, low, no code solutions in industry. Those are really interesting where you start to think about the value you could create for your company could be a lot more around creativity, innovative thinking, and the ability to then apply those things to problems starts to get a whole lot easier. And when that happens, I think our capabilities as analysts, scientists, engineers, analysts, data people, like the things that we can create can be a whole lot more interesting. So I'm super excited for that. I'm super excited to see where Looker goes and the new things that we do there. So I think it's a great time to be in industry.
I love that perspective. You know, when the only limit to the insights you can obtain is your own creativity, I think we'll be in a really good place for sure.
Yeah, well said.
With that, Jim, I really want to thank you for your time, and we're super excited and proud to partner with you and Comcast. And I want to thank our audience today for joining us. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.
Yeah, thank you.